The United States and Iran are participating in negotiations to try to come to a final deal to end the war that the U.S. has been waging against Iran for more than 100 days. However, those talks are not going very well. This June, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance traveled to Switzerland, where he participated in talks with Iranian officials that were brokered by Pakistan and Qatar. This is just the beginning of the negotiation process, and it's likely to take several weeks. But Iran already has concerns that the U.S. is not serious about abiding by its commitments according to this agreement. Because as part of the larger deal, it's not only the U.S. war against Iran that's supposed to end, but all of the wars in the region. And yet, Israel continues to attack Lebanon, despite the fact that the deal says very clearly that Israel has to stop attacking Lebanon. So in response to the constant violations of this deal by Israel, Iran announced that it would reclose the Strait of Hormuz. This is the world's most important oil transit choke point. Before the U.S. started this war in late February, 20% of the globally traded oil passed through this narrow strait on a daily basis. Iran has used this strait as important geostrategic leverage in this conflict. And Iran has made it very clear that if Israel does not abide by the agreement and continues to attack Lebanon, it will close the strait once again, which could cause a massive shortage of global oil and could cause oil and gasoline prices to once again skyrocket. So this has led to a big debate. Many people are asking if Israel will be able to sabotage the negotiations that the U.S. is carrying out with Iran. The Israeli regime has made it clear that it does not like this deal. It does not want the U.S. to sign this deal with Iran because Israel wants regime change in Iran. And Trump thought that they could carry out regime change when they launched this war of aggression on the 28th of February, carrying out these surprise attacks where they carried out so-called decapitation strikes against all of the Iranian leadership. And the U.S. arrogantly thought that it could simply overthrow the Iranian government and put in power a puppet regime, maybe the son of the former Shah, the former monarch, the so-called crown prince who's been living much of his life in the U.S. But Washington learned that actually Iran was much stronger than it thought. However, Israel is absolutely obsessed with regime change in Iran, and this is why Netanyahu has tried to sabotage this agreement. However, I think a lot of this is simply hot air. It's done for public relations reasons, because the reality is that if the U.S. truly wanted to stop the Israeli war in Lebanon, the U.S. could force Israel to stop overnight, immediately, by telling Israel that it's no longer going to give any military support. And top Israeli military officials have acknowledged that Israel cannot wage these wars without U.S. support. A senior Israeli Air Force official told the major Israeli newspaper that Israel could not, for instance, wage war in Gaza without U.S. support. And yet in Gaza, this was largely a defenseless population. There were some fighters, but very few, and they had very primitive technology. In Lebanon, you do have some armed resistance groups fighting against the Israeli occupation, and they have access to more advanced weaponry. So if Israel couldn't fight in Gaza without U.S. support, there's no way that it could ever fight in Lebanon without U.S. support. And ironically, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has publicly admitted this. Vance gave a press conference at the White House in which he actually criticized Israel and said that the U.S. is the only remaining major ally that Israel has in the entire world, which, by the way, is pretty much true. The Israeli regime is completely isolated. Netanyahu is a complete maniac who's wanted by the International Criminal Court for the crimes against humanity that he's carried out against the Palestinian people in Gaza. And now he's doing something very similar in Lebanon. So listen to these remarks from J.D. Vance in this press conference. But I also think you should keep in mind the hypocrisy here, because in the same press conference, Vance acknowledged that in the past 3 months, the U.S. has given Israel 2/3 of all of its military aid.
But to some of these cabinet members in Israel who are attacking the President of the United States, the other thing that I would say is that over the last 3 months, 2/3 of the defensive weapons that have protected your homeland have been built by American hands and paid for by American tax dollars.
So this is Vance acknowledging that Israel could not carry out this war in Lebanon without U.S. support. He's boasting of how the U.S. is supporting Israel. Listen to these remarks and keep in mind this question in the back of your head. If the U.S. truly wanted Israel to stop attacking Lebanon, why does it keep giving military aid to Israel? It should cut it off immediately. Listen here.
There's a report in Axios that Netanyahu's fuming over this. Israel doesn't feel bound to the MOU as it relates to Lebanon. If, as you mentioned, your frustration with Israel striking in Beirut, hitting apartment buildings, if that continues, could it torpedo the deal? And what would the U.S.'s response be to a broader war in Lebanon involving Israel and Hezbollah?
Yeah, well, I don't want to get into hypotheticals that could torpedo the deal, because I think the president's expectation is that all of our friends, the Israelis, the Arabs in the region, we're going to work together and actually see this deal to completion. Now, I saw the Axios report, that Netanyahu is fuming. That's not reflective of the conversations that I've had with him, but maybe he's saying something to somebody else that he's not saying to me. What I will say, and this does bother me, is that you've seen people within Bibi's cabinet who have come out and attacked the deal, and in some ways very personally attacked the President of the United States. And I guess my message to them would be twofold. Number one, Donald J. Trump is the only head of state in the entire world who is sympathetic to the nation of Israel at this moment in time. And he happens to be the head of state of the world's superpower. If I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world. And the second message I would give to some of those cabinet members, Bibi, to his credit, has not gone down this path, but to some of these cabinet members in Israel who are attacking the President of the United States, the other thing that I would say is that over the last 3 months, 2/3 of the defensive weapons that have protected your homeland have been built by American hands and paid for by American tax dollars. The problem for Israel is not Donald J. Trump. And anybody in Israel who thinks their biggest problem is the President of the United States needs to wake up and smell the reality of the situation that country is in. Thank you all.
Note that was how J.D. Vance ended the press conference, with a kind of proverbial mic drop. And there's been a lot of coverage of this in the media. But like I said earlier, I think a lot of this is hot air. It's for public performance. The Trump administration wants to try to convince the MAGA base that they're pushing back against Israel and they're against Israel's attacks on Lebanon. But my response would be, put up or shut up. If the U.S. truly wants Israel to stop attacking Lebanon, cut off the support. Stop sending weapons to Israel, because as Vance acknowledged, Israel can only attack Lebanon because the Trump administration continues to support it. Of course, this is not new with Trump. This is bipartisan in the U.S. So from October 2023, which was during the Biden administration, until September 2025, in the first year of Trump's administration, the U.S. gave Israel $21.7 billion of military aid, including foreign military financing, offshore procurement, missile defense, replenishing arms delivered to Israel from U.S. stocks, ammunition procurement, and boosting U.S. arms production capabilities. Moreover, if you look at all of the aid that the U.S. has given to Israel in the history of Israel, and this is not adjusted for inflation, this is according to official data from the U.S. government, it is $175 billion. Again, that is not adjusted for inflation. If you adjust it for inflation, it would be significantly higher. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. aid to Israel. And by the way, when we're talking about this issue of aid, it's very important to understand that most of this money gets recycled back into the U.S. military-industrial complex. It's not like the U.S. is just giving big piles of cash to Israel to do whatever it wants. This is money that the U.S. is spending on weapons produced by corporations, for-profit companies in the military-industrial complex like Boeing and Lockheed Martin and General Dynamics and Raytheon. And then those weapon systems and that ammunition and those missiles are being shipped over to Israel. So at the end of the day, it's the military-industrial complex that is profiting from all of this. So when you hear these hypocritical comments from people in the U.S. government like J.D. Vance, correctly pointing out that Israel is totally isolated on the international stage and the U.S. is the only major ally it has left, and then Vance says, be grateful, we're giving you 2/3 of your weapons, my response is the famous Shakespearean quote, thou doth protest too much. If you're serious about actually coming to some kind of peace deal with Iran, then stop helping Israel wage war in violation of the deal. Put up or shut up. In reality, I think what all of this exposes is how the U.S. government is not actually committed to peace. And I'm reminded of comments that were made by Alexander Haig, who was a top U.S. Army general, and he was the Secretary of State in the Ronald Reagan administration in the 1980s. And this is what this top U.S. government official said. Quote, Israel is the largest American aircraft carrier in the world that cannot be sunk, end quote. And Netanyahu, the dictator of Israel, the longest serving leader of the country, has made very similar comments. He referred to Israel as, quote, a mighty aircraft carrier, end quote, of the United States, of the U.S. empire. And Iran understands this. Tehran recognizes that it's Washington that actually has the power here. There's this narrative we hear from many people who say that Israel is the tail wagging the dog. I think that is completely wrong. The U.S. absolutely has the ability to stop Israel's attack on Lebanon immediately if it actually wanted to stop the attack on Lebanon, which is why Iran is using the leverage it has and saying that it's going to reclose the Strait of Hormuz until the U.S. actually abides by the deal. Tehran recognizes that it's the U.S. that has the power here over Israel, and this is the most important leverage that Iran has. On that note, I'm going to conclude. I am Ben Norton. I'm the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. Please like and subscribe. Please share this. I will see you all next time.